Hi, welcome back to Yerushalmi Demai. We are up to Mem Gimel Amud Base. Amr B'Yosi b'Samach L'Tnai based in who? Right. So what are we talking about here? Someone who's relying on. We're talking about you're eating with a friend, and has everything been meistered or not? And the Gemara Rabbi Yosi comes along with a Samach L'Tnai based in who. You're relying on Tanai based in. So he's not exactly explaining what is he talking about here. So let's see. Ma'al Tanai based in. What is it where Rabbi Yosi says you can rely on Tanai based in, on the based in? Ad Malcolm Shadas Taya. Now what we're talking about here, we brought a brisa earlier on. Now we're talking about, so not necessarily when you're eating at a friend, but basically if you take too few maestros, then your fruit is problematic. If you take too much maestros, your maestros are problematic. But if you took a bit less or a bit more, and it's the sort of amount that a person would make a mistake, then the Tanai based in is that the hafrasha should be valid in a way that we will make insignificant that tiny bit less or that tiny bit more. You follow? So basically what we're saying is that outside, I'm going to close the window. Sorry. Maybe it's going to stop. So what we got here is basically you may have taken too much Maisa and maybe will cause a problem, or you won't have taken enough and it will cause a problem. But the Tanai based in is that we will make everything just right. And the hafrasha will work in a way that it's meant to. Okay, so if you ended up doing more than a tenth or less than a tenth of maestros, the maisa is chal at the right amount. So if let's say you had masa rishon, which needed trumas masa taking, and you separated trumas masa a bit more than a tenth, then the person who make a mistake, meikar din, what you've separated should be a mixture of trumas masa and masa which has got trumas masa mixed in. Because on the more than the tenth you separated, you didn't intend to separate Maser. And basically, Cohen wouldn't be able to eat the mixture. Tebel is also to Cohen. These are the sort of issues that would come about. But based in Make It Tanai, the tenth of the Maser which is extra, which you set aside, will become Trumas Maser on the rest of the Maser which is extra. And what you've separated will be a Terubas of Terumas Maser and Maser which is all Masukan, which a Cohen can eat. And so it works the other way if you ended up doing a bit less as well. The same sort of problems. So there we are. So Ma'al Tanai based in. So what is also included in Tanai based in? When you separated a little of Maser Rishon and based in making condition that the Maser which is lacking, they make a condition Kadesh Kovea Maser Rishon B'Tzfana. They said, you know what? You should separate your Maser Rishon in the north of the fruit, or Maser Sheni Ledromai, or Maser Sheni on the south, or Trumas Maser B'Tzaf Tzfana, or Trumas Maser on the north of the Maser Rishon. And that way, it's all, by giving a shame, you should fix a place, right? Where the place will be, that's where the parents will be. No, you don't just say a fifth of the fruit. No. Or a tenth will be Maser. By fixing a place, the Tanai based in is, let's say you did a bit less, and the Tanai based in, it will go on the right amount that it needs to go on. Yeah? In that area, not just in the midst of the Paris. It will be in the north, it will be in the south, wherever it is, that idea. So Ma'al Tanai based in, and what also is the Tanai based in this matter, that if you did a bit less in Maser Sheni, and based in make it Tanai, that it will be on the Paris, also on the Maser Sheni, which is lacking, because when you redeem the Maser Sheni, is the Tanai based in who, Sheba that even on the extra Maser Sheni, which is because of Tanai based in, that will also be redeemed. Even if you didn't have intention to redeem it, that extra bit is also redeemed as well. Okay, so the based in sort of add and subtracts within to get to the right amount. Now, you can give a name to Truma and Maser and fix a place in the fruit without separating it, without actually separating yet. You'll give all the names and then you'll separate it. So Ad Kedun. So we've learned how you can separate a place by Yavish. Right, with a solid like Tvua, Peras, we want the area on this side is designated in my mind, on the north, on the south. But what about Belach? What about liquids, wine, oil, which mixes up, which is more fluid? How can you fix a place for that? So the word doesn't actually answer the question. Right? This is the general question. Can you take Maisa on running fluids by giving a name without separating it by pile, like the Mishnah's told us with Yavesh things, okay? The Gemara doesn't answer the question, because it's Pashat. Davalach, just close the door please actually as well, yeah? Close the door. All right. Davalach, there is a way to call something maestros and fix a place without being mafresh it. He says if it's demai, let's say, you can say the 100 that I'm going to leave over, the rest of the cup, right at the end of the cup, what I will leave over, that is davalach. You can be mafresh that at the end, once you've drunk from it. You can say it would be maser from now, and what's left and what's maser is next to it. So there are ways how, with a cup, we've come across this in Bavli as well, it will be mechulal on the money, etc. So it's through breira, right? You're leaving a bit at the end, and it comes out what you've left was the trumas maser. What's next to it was maser. Now, of course, it does depend if breira, we hold yesh breira or ein breira. We paskin with rabbinical dinim yesh breira, demai, which is only a rabbinical obligation, right? Therefore, we can rely on breira in such a case. You could give a name to those maestros. Okay, so there are solutions for liquids as well. Let's carry on. Havale mea ta'anim. So if you had, let's say, 100 figs of teva, chamshin ravravin v'chamshin dakikin, 50 big ones and 50 small ones. In yisab min ravravaya, if you're going to take from the big ones for maser, then really you don't need to take 10. Because if you take from the big ones, in terms of volume, you only have to take 9. Min dakikasa, if you're going to take from the small ones, well, maybe then you have to take 11. Right? It all depends on the weight and the volume and so on. He says, for example, the 50 small ones might be equal in weight and volume to the 40 big ones. And therefore the fractions, so 50 big ones and 112, it goes into different figures, how much you have to take. You may have to do more if you end up with the small ones than if the big ones. Nasav Asra min Rav Ravaya, if by mistake you took 10 of the big ones, from Maser Rishon, from the big ones, is Tamon Chado Chulin. Well, really, it was only meant to be 9. So you end up with having, amongst the figs of Maser Rishon, one fig which is really Chulin, V'sukan. Because Tanai based in that the 9, they are the Maser for the other remaining ones, and also on the extra one that you separated, and now that extra fig has become Chulin, V'sukanin, proper Chulin. V'chosh Loma, now if you're going to be worried that maybe when the Levi comes along, he wants to separate Trumas Maser on the figs of Maser which he has, and he might use that extra one, which is Chulin, right? Shema Isa Chulin, that fig of Chulin, he might try and use it, Isa Trumas Maser. He'll make it into Trumas Maser for the other figs. So the owner made a mistake. He thought, right, I'll take 10, but really he gives them all to Levi as Maser, and the Levi doesn't know that one of them is really Chulin. And then it will come out that fig, which is really Chulin, he'll take it to make Trumas Maser for the other 9, Uksiv, and yet it says with Trumas Maser, you shall separate from the Maser, Trumas Hashem Maser Min HaMaser. You have to separate Trumas Maser from Maser, not from the Chulin. V'lo Chulin Min HaMaser. So the Tanai Basin is not going to help to remove a chashash in this sort of mistake. So how's it going to help? You know what, you make a condition and say, HaMaser Hazeh, the Peres HaLolach is this Maser that these 100 fruit require, it's close to the stem of each one of the 10 figs that I have separated. So, umahalech, and therefore the Maser spreads towards the second side of each fig, until it reaches in the 10 figs together to make the required amount. So what we're saying is, it's not that 9 become Maser and the 10th one is Chulin. We're saying no. All 10 are Maser, but not all of them. A percentage of them. Yeah? It starts at each of the 10 a tiny bit and spreads as much as it needs. But we're not saying the 10th one is actual Chulin, because the Maser has spread through all 10 to a degree. Okay? You understand the difference? So then through that Mesa, when the Levi takes from the figs for Trumas Maser, is Trumas Maser. Each one of them has got a share which is fitting for Trumas Maser, and Mekosher Chulin, and a tiny element of it might be Chulin. And therefore it can be mafish one fig, and that way is Yotzi Bevadai, the rest of the Maser which he has. Ad Kedun Dava Maruba. That's all very well how Mesa make it tonight in a situation where you got a lot of figs. If you didn't have so many figs, let's say Habale Esatin, you had 10 figs. 5 big and 5 small. In Yisab in Rav, so you take from the big one, you need to take one fig less a bit, right? Because 5 big and 5 small. So if you're going to take one, well, that might be too much. You need to take one less a bit. If you take from the small ones, so you have to take one and a bit of another one as well. And if by mistake, if you took one fig from the big ones, is tamam, you have in that fig, after the Tanai Basin, a bit of chulin in it as well, because Tanai Basin is it will work what's required. So if you take one big one, you'll have a bit extra, which is chulin in there. A tenth of the fig will be chulin, Tanai Basin. But again, we have to worry. Maybe that bit of chulin, he might use the Levi to make trumas maser on the maser in the fig, and yet you can't. It says you shall separate trumas Hashem maser min maser. You can't separate trumas maser from chulin, right? You can't separate trumas maser from chulin. Trumas maser has to come from maser. And therefore the Levi is eating maser, which has got trumas maser mixed in, and the Tanai Basin will not help to remove all the dangers in this situation. He said, Rabbi Abba from Katinji Katignaya, he said, Master, let me make a condition, he say as follows. The maser that this fruit requires, again, it's in this fig, at the beginning of the stem, and it's not the whole fig is maser, only 9/10 of it. You fix a place for the maser in the fig, based in master, make a condition, they will be close to the stem, and from there, until the amount of 9/10 of the fig, it will spread out from Messiah, and then you designate Cohen, you say Adkan, until this point in the fig, Siyamti, I've finished the Chelek of Trumas Maser. So therefore, when you're separating Trumas Maser to give it to the Cohen, you'll separate it always from the side near the stem, because that's definitely Maser. Whether if the owner of the produce who separated Maser, he did a bit too much, or he didn't do too much. So you'll always separate it from the area where the Maser element was. Now the Gemara comes back to the Brisa we brought, which talks about calling a name. 100, 1 of 100 there is here. Areu B'Sadzeh, it will be next to that area that I designated. For now, it's Chulin Teva. Right? It's Chulin, yeah, I'm not yet given a name on it. Truma or Maser. I'm not yet given a name. It's still Teva at the beginning. And we said you have to do it in those stages. V'yaima, why can you not say, in this place, 1 of the 100 I have, Areu B'Sadzeh, Maser. The area next to that designated area is Maser. I mean, why do you have to first say 1 of 100 will be Chulin Tevel and give a name of Truma on the rest, and after that go to the 1 in 100 and give it a name Maser? I mean, straight away call that 1 in 100 Maser, and after that give it a name Truma. So again, you know the problem. You can't start calling Truma before Maser, right? Name Samagdim, you end up putting Truma first. You're putting Maser before Truma, and that you can't do. But Yoma, now why can you not say 2 parts of 100? Next to that designated area, the 2 parts is Truma, without starting to mention that 1 of 100 will be, next to the sign will be Chulin Tevel. Just say 2 parts of it will be Truma. Why can you do that? He says, Nimsa, it comes out. If you do that, I Poiches ala Truma, I Moisif ala Truma. Again, you're going to end up having too little Truma or too much Truma. So either you'll have it less than the share that you have to be mafish with Truma's Maser, or you'll add too much. Because you're not going to exactly separate 300s, which is Truma Gedola and Truma's Maser. You'll be a bit less or a bit more, right? And when you're going to tell me that 2 parts of 100 will be Truma, there'll be a bit more or a bit less than 100, or 1 in 100 for Truma's Maser. If you give a name Truma's Maser more than 1 in 100, then the Truma's Maser will be Mukoko because of the Tevel which is mixed in it. And if you give a name on less than 100, then the rest of the fruit that you separated will be ruined because of Tevel that will be mixed with that. But by first saying 1 in 100, Hareu B'Sadzeh, next to that designated area, for now, it's Chulin Teva. And then after that you say, and the fruit that's designated is Truma, and after that you call that 1 in 100, Maser Rishon, or Trumas Maser, and that way, it comes out you're either going to have a bit less than the amount of Truma Gedola, or Moisif, you're going to add a bit more ala Truma. But that's not a problem, because the din anyway that Truma Gedola you can separate it out of estimation, but Trumas Maser you have to get exact. You hear that? Trumas Maser you have to get exact, but Truma itself, if you do a bit more, a bit less, it's okay. Yeah. So you're going to end up, afterwards you'll call 1 in 100 on Maser Rishon and Trumas Maser. Okay. The Maser Rishon, and that will end up being the Trumas Maser. Okay. Right. Halacha Gimel, yeah. Now, we're talking about separating maestros from things which are Chaim Demai, where you might have bought them from various people. Basically, we don't know, is it all Tevel, is it all Chulin, maybe a bit Tevel, a bit of Chulin, so let's see. You buy bread from a baker. Okay, now, this might be a Nachtam who's an Amoritz, or it might be a Chover, who sells a Chiv Hafrosho in a case where the Hafrosho is not on him, only on the purchaser. For example, we said if he's a wholesale baker where his prices are cheaper, we said he has no Chiv to separate Maser, right? Or maybe according to Rabbi Yochanan when the dough is Tameh, etc. So what we got here, you're buying from the baker, if you want, you can take Maser from the hot bread for the cold bread. The cold one for the hot one. Even if the bread comes from many different forms, different shapes, Divrei Rameh, that's the view of Rameh. So you can assume everything's come from the same place.
As long as it's the same kind of flour.
Well, it's the same. We'll see. No, we'll see. If it's the same baker, we're saying everything is the same. The same batch, whatever it is. Now, even if they're in different forms or look differently, it's still okay. Now, why is that? If they were baked like this, it must be they came from the same person. Now, 1 second. Yeah, so let's see now. That's from Rabbi Yehuda Isa. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can't do the hot bread from the cold. The other way. Why? Shani Omer, I say, Chitzim Shalemish, the wheat that they baked the bread yesterday, was from one person, Shalayom, today's wheat, is from someone else. So basically, you can't assume they're all the same. He holds when the bread is baked on different days, maybe the wheat for baking was bought from different people. The bread baked on the same day, even in different forms, he agrees you can say the wheat came from one person. You can be mafresh one bit for the other. So Rabbi Yehuda, however, doesn't like it when it's baked on different days. But Shimon Isa b'Trumas Maser, he forbids separating Trumas Maser from bread which is made in a form for bread which is made in another form. He says, Matzeh b'challah, it allows you to separate challah one batch from the other. Now, Rameh allowed you the colder bread. The cold might mean fresher as well, whichever way around. So Rameh allowed you the yesterdays and the hot of today to be mastering one for the other, because we say you always buy the wheat from the same person. So how far does Rameh go? Ad hechan, how far? Lemafreya, retroactively. How far does Rameh allow you to take maser from the older bread on the fresher bread? How far back? Talmud the Talmud of Rabbi Shimon Levi ad 30 yom. 30 days. All the bread you bought that baker within 30 days, you can take maser one for the other. We already said that one of the rules of Yerushalmi is it likes asking the mafreya questions. Remember that? One of the rules? More than Bavli a bit. And what happened in that stage backwards, what happens? And here's another example of it. Hey Chavida, what situation, the other case we had in Demai, do you remember? Was when a driver, if it's the third time that he brings something, he's considered a donkey driver. So it said, what happened in the middle? And eventually, is it Mafreya when he becomes the donkey driver? Does it change the din retroactively? Hey Chavida, what's the situation here? You got bread from the baker at the beginning of 30 days, or the middle of 30 days, or the end of 30 days. Rishon al gabe sheni min echadu. So the first bread on day 1 and the bread on day 15 is all considered one type. Basically, you can say it was made from the same wheat. You can take meiser one for the other. Sheni al gabe shlishi min echadu. The bread from, let's say, day 15 and day 30, we also say these are from the same person, and you can take meiser one from the other. Rishon al gabe shlishi, day 1 and day 30, shnei min hein. They are considered two species that we're worried maybe they're from wheat that came from two people. Maybe one was meiser and one wasn't, and you can't take meiser one for the other. So he says day 1 and day 30 you can't do. 1 and 15, yes. 15 and 30, yes. But 1 and 30 we can't do.
Who's doing it here? Is that not the bias of the baker is doing it?
We don't know. This could be talking about a case where the baker had no obligation. As we said, maybe it was selling wholesale, whatever it is. So here, you're taking Meiser, so you have to realize that 1 for 15 is okay. 15 for 30 is okay. Alright. So now, Yeah, sometimes the Lashon, Rishon Agabi Shlishi Shnei Minin Heim. It's considered as 2 types. Some say the Lashon here, 30 days, it doesn't mean 30, it means up to 29. 29 inclusive. 30 is considered already something new. Alright. Rav Shimon Isa, B'Trumas Maaseh. Rav Shimon forbade in our mission to separate from bread which was baked in one form for another bread with taking Trumas Maaseh, one for the other, or Mateh B'Challah, he allowed you to separate Challah one bit for the other. Now, we had Rabbi Yehuda who ushered bread which was baked in one day for bread which he baked on another day. Now, Rabbi Yehuda didn't make any chiluk between Maaseh and Challah, but Rav Shimon does make a chiluk between the two. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda ushers also Challah one for the other. So Rabbi Yehuda Isa B'Challah, does he forbid you separating Challah for one day for the next? Surely the dough of the baker becomes tevel for Challah in his domain. The wheat are not tevel for Challah until you start rolling out the dough, right? The flour for the dough, which is done through the baker. So the chiyuv of Challah comes about all bread in the hands of the baker. Therefore, the person who buys it should be separating Challah from, let's say, one day for another day, is all the same chiyuv. If the seller sells where maybe they didn't put chiyuv Challah on him, only on the buyer, and wherever you buy should be proper tevel for Challah midoraisa. Everyone has to separate Challah. If he sells it the way the chiyuv is on him, but he's an Amaretz, and we can't trust him, then don't tell me, well, one day he separated Challah and one day he didn't. That's unlikely. He either always separates or he never does. It was all the same chiyuv, it's Demai Daf. Therefore, we should be mafresh one for the other. So why does Rabbi Yehuda forbid you to be mafresh one batch for another? Ali says, B'shal sa'ar tameh. The baker is borrowing this sort of tameh sourdough from an Amar. It's lastly supposed to make his dough. So one day, he asks for the sourdough from an Amaretz. Another day, he asks for sa'ar for another Amaretz. It could be one separated challah and one didn't. Rabbi Yehuda holds, if you buy from the baker, you can't be mafresh challah from bread which you baked one day for another day, because maybe one day is chayiv challah, right, and the other day is patur, and you're being mafresh patur ala chiyuv. Then the Gemara says, I feel okay, even if you're going to say that the baker did borrow sourdough from others, but lo yes lahilitz veles, but the chiyuv of challah came about in his domain. The sa'ir that he borrows from others is tevel when it's in his hands, even if he borrowed it from someone who's particular. Right, when you take the dough and you take a bit to make it into sourdough, you're not mafresh challah min ha'isa until after you take the chelek you want to make into sa'ir. By separating the challah, you're not being mafresh on the sa'ir. Basically, the sourdough remains tevel. And he says there's no worry here. It's p'tur ala chiyuv, despite the fact that the sourdough that the baker asked from others, and the sourdough is still tevel. Okay. The truth is, Rabbi Yehuda, however, allowed you to separate challah from one bread, which you made on one day for another day. So the Gemara says, you know what? The reason why Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a case, b'shal kikar tameh. The baker borrows tameh bread from an Amaretz, lemalos tanur. You hear that? The baker's making his own stuff, and he borrows tameh bread to fill up the oven. Bread bakes better in a full oven. And we don't know which is the borrowed one. And maybe he separated challah for the loaf before it was lent out. And if the lekeach is going to be mafresh on the other loaves they got from the baker, you're being mafresh p'tur ala chiyuv. So we're talking about a case, you're asking why are you separating? Because he borrowed some stuff to fill up his oven. If he borrowed a tameh bread to fill his oven, so then maaseh mikol kikar v'kikar, you should take maaseh from every single loaf. That even as far as maaseh, we should worry maybe one loaf has maaseh and one isn't, and we should be worried the wheat where the loaves are being made for, and the kikar, the loaf that was borrowed, maybe came from different people. Maybe one took maaseh on the wheat and one didn't. So even if they're done on the same day, you still shouldn't be able to take maaseh one for the other. But Rabbi Yehuda says, on one day for another day you can't do. But in the same day you can do. So why? Ella, he says, the pshat in Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Yochanan, he said elsewhere, come. When it says the baker has to be mafresh challah and trumas maaseh, It's ba'oser b'tara. He makes the dough in a state of purity. The chiyuv challah is on the baker. Don't want to leave it too long. Maybe we don't want it to become tamei. There'll be a loss of the Cohen. Won't be fitting. Whereas kan, but our parak is talking about what you're buying. You're going to be mafresh challah and trumas maser. The buyer is going to separate it truma and trumas maser and challah, and the baker is talking about a case ha'isa b'tuma. He's making it in a state of impurity. Okay, therefore it's not fitting for a Cohen. There won't be a big loss for a Cohen if you don't separate the challah straight away, and that's the difference between the two mishnayos. Now you understand Rabbi Yehuda that if one day the baker will make his dough in a state of tara, state of purity, and he will separate challah because he has the obligation. And another day he'll do it in a state of impurity, right? And he won't separate challah because the chiyuv is not really on him. Therefore, the keach can't be mafresh one for the other. Basically, the baker gets from different supplies, and the way he works is different. Some days everything will be tahar, some days it won't, and then that's why you can't separate one from the other.
But that will mean that you have to take
Each one.
Each
one, exactly. Each one.
How can you type complete baked loaves? Because they won't be complete loaves, then, won't they?
What do you mean? Sorry, go on.
How can you start with giving your customers part loaves of them?
Well, if they would take the challah off, everyone knew they would take the challah off. So they didn't necessarily buy complete loaves. They might have been, as I said, like yesterday, you can have a bit missing, it's still called complete. So everyone might have got a challah with a bit missing, which was the challah that was separated from the dough.
Very small amounts.
Yeah. Another Shai Rabbi Yehuda, we're talking about a case where the baker is doing everything in a state of impurity, yesterday and today. Be'ez la'iditz belas, and it becomes tebel in the baker's place, and it's chayiv challah definitely, and he's not being mafresh challah, the chayiv challah is on the purchaser, and all the bread that lekech buys has got the same obligation. Rabbi Yehuda also agrees you can be mafresh challah from bread baked by the baker one day, from bread baked the next day. Now Rabbi Yehuda never clearly said this, but he agrees to Rav Shimon, who clearly said it. He's saying even Rabbi Yehuda will allow you to separate from today from tomorrow. Okay? But Hadi came, we learned in the Bryce. Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Shimon, Aisrael, B'Trumas Maseh. They forbid B'Trumas Maseh to separate it from bread baked one day from bread baked another day. Or Matirin B'Challah, they allow you to do it with Challah. So you see quite clearly, Rabbi Yehuda allows you to separate Challah from bread of today from bread of tomorrow. Now, we also said, Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon forbid you to be mafresh Trumas Maseh from today for tomorrow, but they allow you to separate challah of the two. So, Rabbi Yehuda Aiseh Trumas Maseh, he forbids Trumas Maseh to separate one day for another. Or Mateh b'challah, he allows it with challah, and Rav Shimon Aiseh Trumas Maseh. Shimon says the same thing. Or Mateh b'challah. So, Ma'abanen, what's the difference between them? He says, Adzate Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Eina mafresh, you're not allowed to be mafresh Maseh, lo b'shal hayom. Al Shalem. It's not today for yesterday's bread. Or yesterday for today. But mafresh, you can separate minatano alatano from bread baked in one form from bread baked in another one. Right? If they were baked on the same day. We don't worry and say, oh, he bought the wheat on the same day from different people, even though he baked it on this day in these different types of forms. Whereas on Dated of Shimon, you can't separate Trumas Maseh even from bread baked in one form from bread baked in another one, because we say you took the wheat from various forms from many different people, and some of them took Maseh and some of them did not. Okay. You buy bread from the palter. Now, the palter is someone who buys in one go a lot of bread from bakers, and he sells them in the marketplace one by one. So he's the middleman. You got me? He's the middleman. He buys from the bakers and sells in the market. So he's the middleman. I mean, it should be the same as Moichadaka, where you sell small amounts. Our Mishnah talks about how the Kach is Ma'aseh. Must be using Amaretz. Alright, so what we got here? If there is bread from various forms, Ma'aseh mikot tfus tfus, you should take Ma'aseh now from bread. So you're getting through this middleman, you have to separate Ma'aseh on each form separately. you can take Maisa one for the lot. One bread in one form for all the breads and all the others. If you take bread from the menapel, we'll see who that is. You have to take from each of the breads from each form. Okay? Now, menapel is a type of middleman. The difference between the normal palter is the normal palter buys only from one baker, according to Rabbi Yehuda. This menapel, Rabbi Yehuda agrees that he buys it from various bakers. Okay? Some learn menapel is he buys a lot of bread from many bakers. He sells it to others. Okay. So, you take maser from each one of the forms. Now, may Rabbi Yehuda argue about if you're buying from the palter, right, this middleman, and we'll see their reasons. And the reason of Rameir, he says the baker has one form for making his bread, different to the form of someone else. But palter mishtamesh, the middleman will use many bakers for his bread. Therefore, if you buy it from the middleman, different shapes, different sizes, because they're baked in different forms, you can't take maser one from the other, because we're worried that the bread is from various bakers, right? But if you bought many loaves, if you buy loaves in their form, as it were, because they were baked, if they're the same image, they probably were baked in the same form, right? It seems that the bakers didn't have the same forms, right? There was one. Each baker had his own style form for his loaf. That's what he says here. They didn't use the same forms. You could take meiser one for the other if they look the same. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Nachta meiser kamas fusin." A baker would have many shapes for his bread. But palta mishtamesh benachtamach, the middleman would only use one baker for the bread that he sells. So the one, if you buy it from the middleman with different sizes, you can take maser one from the other, because we say they're from one baker who baked different sizes. That's what one baker's made that. Now, Rabbi Yehuda agrees, if you buy from the menapel, you can take each one separately. Eza menapel, what's this? To Rabbi Yanai Amri, they said, in the base medrash, let's say you have tisha paltrin, v'asora nachtoimin, tumanya min tumanya. So if you have, let's say, 8 middlemen, buying their bread from 8 bakers, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, the middleman will acquire from one baker. 8 of them, each one will go to one baker. And one will buy his bread maybe from the 2 remaining bakers, so if there were 10. So this palter who buys extra from more than one baker, he's the one called menapel. So some people will go to a few bakers to get their bread. That's what we're saying here. So what do we have? Tisha paltrin asar nachtoimin. So 9 middlemen, 10 bakers. So 8 will go to 8, and 1 will go to 2. Right? 1 will go to 2 bakers. Rabbi Yonah, not to 3 bakers, but to 2 bakers. Rabbi Yonah asked, if in one of the middlemen he had bread of shnei tefosin, 2 forms, we say, well, maybe he gets his bread from 2 bakers. And therefore he is the manpul who buys from more than 1 baker. And the bread that he has in the 2 forms are from 2 bakers. And therefore you have to separate each form separately. Whereas the other men, where each one buys bread from 1 form, they are normal middlemen who buy from 1 baker, according to a view of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that every middleman buys from 1 baker, and then they can take maser 1 bread for all the other bread that they acquire from that middleman. You got that? So if the middleman only goes to 1 baker, you can take maser everything together. If all the middlemen in the town are selling bread from 1 form, no one has any from any other, everyone uses the same form, you should take maser from every loaf separately. On the one hand, we know there's 1 middleman who's buying bread from 2 bakers. On the other hand, no middleman has 2 forms. So it's unusual, it's very unusual to have 2 bakers in the town with the same forms. And we don't know who is the middleman, who's the middleman who's buying from 2 bakers. So out of doubt, any 2 loaves that you buy from the middleman, you have to separate them separately. Take Maaseh on them separately, because they are from 2 bakers, 2 different bakers. One might have had Maaseh taken and one might not. Rabbi Yonah boy. Now we spoke about 9 middlemen and 10 bakers. What about 10 middlemen and 9 bakers? Now what are you going to say? Rabbi Yonah boy, Kamada Tema, just like you say, Tisha Palchit Masor Nachtobin, 9 middlemen, 10 bakers. Then we say Tumania, and the Tumania 8 got from 8. V'cham in the tray, and 1 got from 2. 1 middleman bought his bread from 2 bakers. Are we going to say the same? 9 bakers and 10 middlemen. Tumania min Tumania 8 from 8. Utrei, the Gemara says, Utrei min dechad, and 2 middlemen will buy their bread from the remaining baker. And therefore you don't really have a manpool where Rabbi Yehuda agrees to. I mean, they're all basically normal middle people who buy their bread from 1 baker, and the one who buys bread from therefore, are you with me? And the one who buys bread from one of the middlemen can take Maaseh for 1 loaf for the lot, or maybe not. Tisha, min de Tisha, maybe 9 middlemen are buying their bread from 9 bakers, each from 1. V'chamin kulai, and 1 middleman is buying his bread from all the bakers. So therefore he's buying bread from more than 1 source, where there's no way you can take Maaseh 1 loaf for another loaf. You'll have to take every single loaf, because it's all mixed all over the place. And the one who buys bread from each one of the middlemen, you might be buying off the middleman who goes everywhere. Therefore you have to worry that every loaf you get needs Maaseh taken. So Maaseh we call kika v'kika. You will need to take Maaseh from each loaf in its own right, because we're worried maybe that the middleman that you bought it from him, he was the one who was buying his bread everywhere from all the bakers. Therefore, you have to separate Maaseh from each and every loaf. Okay.